The Iran war was supposed to be over very, very quickly, or at least that's what Trump said early on. And yet here we are about 3 months into it, and it shows no signs of being over anytime soon, which would be bad enough on its own, except the whole world is languishing under this energy shock because so much of the world's oil came via the Strait of Hormuz. And with deals and talks being on again, off again constantly, things are not really looking good. And strangely enough, here in the US, we're not suffering as much as many parts of the world because of our own large oil production and some oil reserves and such. But there are parts of the world, I think, especially countries in Asia, uh, are struggling immensely because of this energy shock. And so there are a lot of questions on everyone's mind. And one of them is there a plan? Because right now, there really does not seem to be a plan. One of the objectives of the war now, well, from the beginning really, was to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But the Strait of Hormuz was open before the war started, so I make it make sense. And I think there is an actual answer to this, which I will get to later on in this video, because I think there are real reasons for this war that are not stated and will never be stated to the public. And I think some of the stated reasons, like preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons and destroying their uranium, I think these are some of the goals of the U.S., sure, but they're not really the main goals. That's more for public consumption, in my opinion. Anyway, so is the Iran war going to become the next Middle East quagmire? And I think there are some signs and indicators that it probably will be. And here's what I think they are. One is that I do think the U.S. could win this militarily. However, I believe that would come at a great cost, especially if it became a boots on the ground war, which has been talked about by the administration. The U.S. could send in special forces and take over Karg Island and go boots on the ground on the mainland. They could really ramp up that stuff and really go for it. And I think the U.S. could win that. However, I don't think it will come to that for a very sharp reason. And that reason is, in the age of social media and mass communications such as we have now, the public simply wouldn't be able to stomach it. People lose their minds when even, say, a half dozen soldiers, American soldiers, lose their lives. And for wartime, that's hardly anything. I simply do not see the U.S. having the same stomach for that kind of death and destruction like we saw during World War II, World War I, the Civil War even, Vietnam. So although I believe the Iran war could be won militarily by the U.S., it would not be easy, and the public just would not accept it. As soon as the first 50 casualties happened, it would instantly be a political failure, or would be considered that. And if you are rivals of the current administration, so if you're the political left in the U.S., you are going to take all of that news and all of that stuff that will inevitably show up on social media very quickly, and you're going to use that politically. That's just an inevitability if it came to that. And so I think, in a similar way that Vietnam became a political loss, but not really a military loss per se for the U.S., I think something similar would happen with the Iran war if it came to boots on the ground, except that there would be even less of a stomach now than there was then. And the American public, got fed up with Vietnam badly, and that was half a century ago. Now, I can imagine one argument against this might be, well, but look at what's going on with, say, the Russia-Ukraine war. There's a ton of stuff, a ton of videos showing up on the internet constantly that show I don't know if I can mention it on YouTube, but they show soldiers on both sides being um, unalived by drones. And so you could say, well, that kind of stuff is just a symptom of modern day warfare. And of course, that stuff's going to show up online. That doesn't mean that the the war couldn't really be fought and won and people wouldn't accept it. Except, in my humble opinion, I think that those countries are probably a lot more, how should I say it? Their violence and instability and collapse is much fresher in their minds. I mean, the Soviet Union only collapsed around 40 years ago, so it's still well within living memory. And then, of course, Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union, and so those very difficult times are much fresher in their minds. There are young people, well, I guess they'd be middle aged now, um, who were young when that happened, or there are people who remember that. Whereas if you look at the US, it has been around 80 years since the end of World War II, or 50 years since the end of Vietnam. So it's a little bit further back in history. And in the case of World War II, it's starting to slip out of living memory. We're almost there, probably another few years, and we're there. So the last major war that the US fought that had major casualties was Vietnam. And regardless of what you think about the war and if it made sense, if it was just, whatever, it really did not go over well with the American public, especially as it dragged on. And the Afghanistan and Iraq wars were, or at least the second Iraq war, were considered quagmires after a while. And at first, of course, it was the political left was against it because the administration at the time was on the right. And then at the time, I'm talking, the few years after 9/11, the first few years after 9/11, the political right, of course, was in support. But eventually it all kind of flatlined into everyone saw it as a quagmire. Everyone was thinking, it's time for us to go. Now, of course, the way it was actually done, or the withdrawal was done, especially in Afghanistan, obviously was not good. But people well before that point thought that, we needed to be out of there. It's like, what are we doing here anymore? And with economic conditions really not being good for the average guy back home, I just do not think that the American public would be able to stomach this. Now, maybe promises could be made of, well, if we do this and we accept the sacrifice, then things get better here economically. Gas prices go way down. Maybe that could happen and a certain portion of the population would accept it, maybe. But I think overall it would just be an instant political and PR loss for the US and for the current administration once that stuff hit the internet, which would happen quickly. Okay, so back to the purpose of the war. So some of the stated purposes include preventing Iran from finalizing nuclear weapons and destroying their uranium and such. So I'm not saying that those things are not part of the reason, but I do not think they're the main reason. I think that is more for public consumption. So what are the real deepest, biggest, truest reasons for the war? Well, I have a few ideas. And the first one is to protect the petrodollar, which is the US dollar. Iran has talked about, and I'm not sure if they've actually done this or tried to do it yet, but they've talked about trading their oil in Chinese yuan. And obviously that would be a threat to the US's petrodollar status. Or at the very least, it wouldn't displace it automatically overnight, obviously, but over time that would more and more impede upon the US's petrodollar status. So by destabilizing Iran and sort of holding things up there in the Middle East and causing this energy shock, it at least pauses that. So, and like I said earlier, even though this is making people in the US suffer, it's also making other people in the world suffer, and really generally worse than the US is doing right now. For example, gas prices, of course, have shot up a lot in the US, but in other parts of the world, it's even more severe. So, to go along with preserving the petrodollar status, I think it's also to sort of interrupt China economically, and it's a form of soft or economic warfare with China. And so, in that sense, I would say it's another proxy war, which, again, going by the conventional wisdom, uh, that's really the only way that the superpowers of the world can fight each other without actually fighting each other, because I think the prevailing notion is that if they did it directly, then it's going to come to nuclear war, and that's really the end of civilization, or at least the end of civilization in one hemisphere. I think these are the two main reasons that aren't being stated, but are the reality behind the scenes. Now, if I had to offer one more possibility, it would be this, and that is simply that this was a very bad miscalculation on the part of the Trump administration. Because at least if you take it at face value, Trump was saying in the first few days that the war was basically already over. I mean, it was like we had like 3 or 4 supposed victories in the first 2 weeks of the war. And it's like, well, if the war's over, if the war's won, then why is it still happening? And I'm not even saying that Trump was lying. He may have really believed that. It may have just been a very bad miscalculation, or things just did not go according to plan. The U.S. has this tendency to see every conflict as, if you just give them shock and awe and you just dominate, then people they will give up very quickly. And that's not necessarily how it works. And it has failed enough that, we probably should have learned by now. And I think the main thing lending credence to this idea is that every day or two, the talks and the deals, or the supposed ones, are on again and off again. It's like it's just changing every 36 hours. And so to me, that suggests that it doesn't seem like there's a plan, because things didn't go according to plan, and now there is no plan B, really. So anyway, I hope I'm wrong about this. I hope this is not going to be the next quagmire. I hope there's a peaceful resolution to this war soon. I hope we can somehow get there. I think it's not looking likely. The situation's not looking good. And then keep in mind, too, even if, say, the war could be ended tomorrow, the world's not going to go back to it was more than 3 months ago overnight. Now, I think eventually things would stabilize, but it's not like it would happen the next day. It would take time. It would be a lot like, I think, how supply lines had to take time to recover, but they eventually did. During the pandemic years. And then another example, more related to war, would be how there was going to be a crisis with wheat supplies because of the Russia-Ukraine war. And then I forgot the details, but Russia and Ukraine worked out a deal so that Ukraine could keep selling wheat to the world. It was something like that, because, Ukraine is just this big flat land that grows a lot of wheat, basically. So things can adapt and they can bounce back, but it takes time, and it will take a lot of hardship to get there. So anyway, please let us know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think the war is going to be over soon and we'll get back to normal relatively easily and quickly? Or do you think that the Iran war is the next quagmire? Please let us know your opinion in the comments, and thank you for listening. And if you wouldn't mind liking and sharing and subscribing, and getting people into this discussion, that would be very appreciated. It helps me keep doing what I do. And we'll see you in the next one.